Well, hi, and welcome to Taxing Tuesday, which is the third of our devotionals where we're considering the Passion Week of Jesus. And that's where I'd like to start today, is by asking the question, why a week? Why is the Passion story strung out over this week-long period of time when, in fact, Jesus could have just marched into town on the Passover, upset the Romans, been sentenced to death and crucified in the same day? Why is it strung out over this long period of time? Well, like all the other details we've been examining in our studies, the answer lies buried deep in the Old Testament scriptures. When God was laying out to Moses the religious system for Israel, he said, "You will hold 7 holy convocations." Most of our Bibles translate it as feasts or festivals. But the word holy convocation actually in English means a holy rehearsal. And the reality is that each of those 7 feasts that the Jews were meant to observe through the year were actually a prophetic foretelling of something that was going to be fulfilled in the birth, life, death, resurrection, and second coming of Jesus. And so what I want to do is I want to drop into Exodus chapter 12, verses 3 to 5. And here we have Moses laying out the details of how Passover is meant to be celebrated. And we're told in that passage that on the 10th of Nisan is one of their months, they were to take a lamb, and it was to be without spot or blemish. And then on the 14th, it was to be sacrificed, and then it was to be eaten. Why that gap between the days? Well, the rabbis came to the conclusion that between the 10th and the 14th was when you were meant to inspect it, is when you were meant to examine this lamb to make sure that it was truly spotless, to make sure that it was truly without blemish, so it could be a proper sacrifice that fulfilled the law. Now, the fascinating thing is, Jesus rolls into town on the 10th of Nisan, and on the 14th of Nisan, he is executed on a Roman cross at the will of the religious leaders. But what about the days in between those dates? Well, these are the days where we find Jesus in and out of the temple every day. And in the temple, he is conducting a huge amount of teaching. He's teaching, he gets debated, he gets refuted, and in some places he turns around and turns the tables on the religious leaders, and he actually rebukes them for their hollow and their shallow and their fruitless religious life. And then towards the end of that week, when Jesus is in one of his false trials, we find out that the chief priests had engineered a whole bunch of people to bring false testimony about Jesus. But the truth is, when they were examined, none of these testimonies stood up. There was found to be nothing held against him. And in that moment, the gospel writer is telling us Jesus has been examined, and he has been found spotless, and he's been found without blemish. What I want to do is drop into the middle of one of those little encounters. It's probably one of the most famous ones. It's the story about taxes. Should taxes be paid to Caesar? There's an interesting collusion of parties here, because we have the Pharisees, who were very much the full-blooded religious Jews. And on the other hand, we have the Herodians. They were those supporters of Herod. And as you know, Herod was in collusion with the Romans. And they come together to plot against Jesus. They've each got something to lose if trouble breaks out because of Jesus' teaching or actions whilst he's in Jerusalem. And they come to Jesus and they ask him a question. And the question is this: is it right to pay taxes to Caesar? And what I want you to understand is that's a catch-22. Because if he says, yes, it's right to pay taxes to Caesar, then the Jews are going to be upset. If he turns around and says, no, it's not right to pay taxes to Caesar, then actually the Romans will be upset and they'll be down on him like a ton of bricks. And so Jesus turns around to these guys and he says, why do you test me, you hypocrites? He knew this was a trap. He knew that they were trying to hang him on the horns, as it were, of a dilemma. And he does this amazing thing. He says, bring me a coin, bring me the kind of coin that you pay taxes with. And so they bring to him one of these. This is a denarii. It's the coin that's used to pay the Roman tax. And in that moment, he skewers them. And I'll explain why. This whole story takes place in the Jewish temple, the center of the cult of worship for Yahweh or Jehovah. And he says to them, give me the coin that you use to pay taxes. And one of them fishes into their pocket or their purse, and they pull out this coin, and it has an image of Caesar upon it. Now, the Hebrew Torah clearly indicates you shall make no graven image. And at the time of Jesus, Caesar wasn't just an image on a coin. He was actually considered to be a god. It all started when Julius Caesar died, and a load of Roman sages saw this comet arise into the sky, and they said, wow, that must be Julius Caesar ascending to the pantheon of gods in the heavens. And his adoptive son, Augustus Caesar, said, wow, well, if Julius Caesar is God, then that makes me son of God. I just love that, actually, because it's during the reign of Augustus Caesar that the Son of God, Jesus Christ himself, is born. It's almost ironic, really, that that coin that would have been circulated at the time of Augustus that would have said, Augustus Caesar, Son of God, was actually bankrolling the propaganda that says God himself can come in flesh. And here we have God in flesh, Jesus himself, and he stands before them and he says, let me see the coin. And they give him the denarii. And he asks a simple question. He says, whose image is on that coin? And they say, well, Caesar's. And he goes, well, it's easy then. Pay to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. And then what most of us do is we read on with the Passion story and we miss a very, very subtle Hebrew wordplay. You see, the word image is first used in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 to 27. And it says, and God made them, Adam and Eve, in his image. In the image of God, he made them. Jesus' teaching was, if something has Caesar's image on it, render it to Caesar. But if something has the image of God on it, render that to God. I don't think I've ever heard anybody teach on this before. Jesus was actually hinting, he was alluding to, this is a Jewish style of teaching, he was alluding to the reality that each one of us bears the image of our Creator. You bear his image, I bear his image. And that image means that the apple hasn't fallen far from the tree. We are a chip off the old block. A friend of mine talks about us being a glorious ruin. As in, the moment we are born, we bear the image of God, but it's also marred by sin. But Jesus is going to the heart of what life is about. And it's simply this. You and I bear the image of God. Therefore, we need to render to him what is his. We belong to him. There is no corner of our life. There is no dark and dusty cupboard of our being that does not belong to him. Every single part of us belongs to him. And so we are to give our lives wholeheartedly to him. And I want to encourage you today to take some time with the Father and just ask Holy Spirit to come in and examine you. And just ask him, show me, Holy Spirit, if there is any part of my life that is not being rendered to God. Now, maybe that's a painful thing because there's some area of trauma in your life, or there's some kind of habitual sin that you've had or whatever, and you just find it hard to let go of that. But I promise you this, Jesus never asks us to do anything that he will not empower us to do through the Holy Spirit. So the taxing question I have for us all today is, we each bear the image of God, but are we rendering to him what is truly his? Bless you, and see you next time.